to occur. And so there's sort of this proactive versus reactive theme throughout the book where, we can have these problems and we can either sit back, complain, and handle them the same way over and over, or we can take action to move forward. That's another theme. My personal favorite, there's two really favorite chapters I have. One is on the emotional bank account and how when we communicate with people, we sort of build up this reservoir of either positive or negative things. And as we build up this thing through like time and different things like that, our bank account kind of it accumulates more money. But at the same time, this whole bank account can fall apart from lying, cheating, and doing something that really damages a relationship.
So let's maybe like take an example. So like let's say like when you first meet someone, or maybe you're like going on a date with somebody, showing up late, for example, is like a negative that pulls money out of your bank account. You know what I mean?
I showed up late today.
Well, no. But for example, like but if you were to like let's say bring some roses or something, or you were able to establish something, you went out your way to do something very nice for them. And this is seen a lot easily in like first meeting relationships, like a date or something like that. But in a family life or people that you know really well, this is where it matters much more, because you don't try to keep track of your emotional bank account with those type of people. Like when you first meet somebody, you're very sensitive and you're noticing like your emotional bank account. You're like, okay, does this person like me or not? Like maybe I should do something like nice to them. But with a family member, you kind of take it for granted. So when you're able to like unload the dishes from the dishwasher, or you're able to do these certain things that show that you're going out of your way to help somebody that's close to you, that kind of builds your emotional bank account. So when you need a withdrawal, say, hey, can you go pick up the kids from the soccer game? That is easily done by the other person. Stephen Covey kind of talks about like when you're in the negative, when you're in the red zone, and you ask the same favors, like, hey, can you pick up the kids from the soccer game? The response is not, yeah, sure, of course. I mean, we're family, let's do this. It's more of, well, hey, I've been picking up the kids for like the last week, and honestly, I haven't seen you been doing anything, and usually a fight comes from that. So that's why I think the principle or the metaphor of using an emotional bank account really helps you keep track, especially if you're like a logic type of guy, of how to approach and sustain relationships.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add to that, like I think that the most one of the most valuable things that's often overlooked in building like these emotional bank accounts. Basically, the analogy is that when we have a bank, we want to store money in it instead, and we want to be in the positive, because when we do that, the bank is more willing to lend us money to do favors for us. And the same thing holds with people and stuff. But I think one of the most valuable things to build these accounts is time, just spending time with someone and listening to their perspectives and their opinions and stuff unjudgmentally.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into one of my favorite chapter in that book, and that was on seek first, understand, then to be understood.
And that's what I was going to say is like my other favorite one is on seek first, understand before being understood.
Yeah, so I'll break down, maybe you can give examples and we'll kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, well, would you want to go back and like go a little bit deeper into some of these ideas that we've talked about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so just because I really love 7 Habits, we'll do this specifically for that. But so the first chapter I talked about was the difference between using techniques versus having character. Like techniques have their place and they have their value, but without good character, they will not be effective. So it kind of leads back into what we were talking about, in the Social Dynamics podcast. We talked about how when you're talking to someone, they subconsciously evaluate different things, like your power, your warmness, your presence, your judgmentalness, and they evaluate these things. And the subconscious is very good at picking up on the slightest inconsistencies. And so basically, the inconsistencies, as we discussed, sort of develop from poor belief structures, poor beliefs. And Stephen Covey talks about how, like I said before, if you have a map of New York and you're trying to get somewhere, but the map is wrong, you won't get there. The same thing is if we have a belief map in our life and it's incorrect, we won't get to the end destination that we want to.
So you're saying get a direction first, like figure out what your ultimate goals are, and then try to find it, rather than just like hitting the road running and just trying to figure out, like just doing stuff.
Right, and so that's the next step, is like how do you build this map? And we can sort of use our logic to sort of figure out what it is that we want in life, where we want to go. And Stephen Covey uses this example in the book that I think is a great example, but he says to figure out what we really value in life, we should imagine our funeral and figure out what it is that we want people to say about us. So then we really determine what we value.
Right.
So if you, like, when you die, if you wanted to accumulate lots of money and at your funeral you want people to talk about how rich you are, then you should pursue making a lot of money.
Though ironically,
how many people would want that?
Ironically, here's the thing, for like a lot of career-driven people like myself, like, you kind of want to be like the top guy of the institution and stuff, but if you do that funeral exercise, that's usually not what you want people to say. You don't want people to be like, he was making this salary and, he made it to this level. And I just find that a very insightful exercise to do.
What you see is that you want people to respect you firstly, and to appreciate your help and aid that you've given them, and you want them to like love you, basically. You don't want people to like envy you. And by doing this exercise, you sort of see, and so that's how you can start to construct this like belief map, like how your beliefs should shape your actions on a daily basis. And so techniques, like I said, have their place. But Covey also identifies that, like, in the last 50 years, self-help books have turned into technique upon technique. But if we lack good character, good morals, then the techniques will continually fail.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, our subconscious can detect those inconsistencies. And so, like, when someone's using a technique on us, it's very easy to decipher whether the technique they're using is being used for an ulterior motive or because they actually care about human beings in general.
Right.
And I think Covey really, preaches the idea that each human being has, like, inherent value, not just to themselves, but to all people. And each person deserves respect and time.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing. And that I sort of discussed how Covey talks about being proactive versus being reactive. And he gives a story of a guy who suffered through Auschwitz concentration camp. The book, he's actually alluding to a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is one of my favorite books, and that would be later on the list. But basically, this guy went to Auschwitz camp, and he realized that, being humiliated and being treated like you're not even a human being is something that you allow to happen personally.
Yeah.
You like allow these things that other people are saying to affect you. And he made this realization that no matter what these prison guards say to me, I don't have to be affected by it.
Yeah.
And he said that he actually found some happiness despite being in Auschwitz concentration camp, which we all know is horrible. And so that's the thing is, like, when our life situations are extremely challenging, we can continue to just allow them to pull us down.
Yeah. One thing, I just wanted to comment on this on the side. Something that has always just piqued my interest is words and how hurtful they can be and how aggravated and angered you can become just simply by words. But the thing is that imagine whatever they say that makes you aggravated. Imagine they were just speaking in a language you didn't understand. You would not feel anything from it, right? So if you were like looking down this friendly space, if you're just another species or something, you just see people talking to each other, and you'd be like, oh, okay, nothing happens. But then when we're speaking English or something, then you become like aggravated, and you storm out the house and everything like that.
Yeah.
And I've just always wondered, I thought to myself, they really are just words. And what are you actually getting aggravated by? It's the idea behind
it's
the
the emotion too. And we discussed in a previous podcast how words have emotional connections.
Right.
So when I say awesome, it makes me feel a little bit good inside because that awesome word is connected to an emotion. And this is why hypnosis works, is because your eyes are getting heavy and you start feeling that.
Yeah.
And things like that. So so exactly. Like, words hurt because of the emotions that we connect to them and stuff. But we actually can sort of override our system and choose to not let this stuff affect us.
Yeah.
And it is just words at the end of the day. Authority is just another person who we give arbitrary authority to.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things like this in life.
Right.
Another story that I think is really important to look at that kind of goes over this reactive versus proactive mindset is the story of a guy who works at a company and he has a terrible boss that everyone hates.
Huh, okay.
The boss is the opposite of what we talked about. He doesn't have an open door policy. He always thinks he's right. He doesn't listen to his lowers to get advice or opinions on anything. And so there's a guy in the company who is in this situation, and he decides, instead of doing what everyone else does and when talking bad about the boss when he's not there, doing all this stuff, that he is going to be proactive. And so he starts spending time with the boss, listening to his opinions and stuff and really respecting them. While everyone else, they'd maybe listen, but then they'd go back behind his back and like make fun of him or talk about how bad he was or something.
Right.
Well, he decided to go in there and listen to him, and actually by listening to him, he then had the ability to like input some direction and stuff, which kind of leads in the seek for us to understand before being understood. But he took the time to do stuff that no one else would do, and he was proactive about the situation. And what ended up happening is his boss sought out his advice, and sought out his expertise and stuff, and suddenly this guy was suddenly leading the company, which is pretty amazing.
That is pretty.
But one thing that is really illustrated through this example is that being proactive versus being reactive is very common sense.
Right.
It makes sense. Like, you don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over again if it's not working. You want to like step in, try something new, and take initiative. But it's common sense, but it's difficult. It's always challenging.
Right.
When everyone else is, hating on the boss, your inclination is to also like to do that, not to step forward and do something that goes against the grain of society.
Yeah. Let me. One thing I just want to briefly talk about. I know it's a big topic, but it kind of links into this. Is there's this huge debate between like peer pressure and why does it even exist in the first place. Like, let's suppose there's a religion that everyone believes around you, and so but you don't really buy it. You just don't think it's correct. Odds are, though, if you're smart enough, you probably pretend to at least believe in the religion because you win the social favor of everybody around you. And if people think that you think like them, they're more likely to be on your side. So in the gossip arena, in your job example, a lot of people might not have anything against the boss, but they gossip just so they win favor with everyone around them.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so hard, especially in like situations like that, to be a proactive person.
Yeah. And maybe I'll throw out an example because we don't all have bad bosses that we could take proactivity towards. But more of like a common situation is just like fighting with siblings and stuff.
Yeah.
Like a sibling and another sibling get into a fight, and you can continue to keep doing this and repeating this pattern, getting into the fight, or you can say like, look, I'm sorry that I fought with you. We don't need to fight like this. I may have been wrong. I just didn't understand you. It was a misinterpretation. And you can take the initiative. But like, as we all know, this is very hard to do because like when you're in the heat of a battle with someone,
right,
you want to just continue to
which
trying to
is
win.
actually like totally bewildering to me because
That
like,
we can even do this.
Yeah, because imagine like when you think about it, like the whole point of like a family or friendship is to help the other person. But when you're in an argument, every fiber of your moral being wants to destroy that same person that you've spent years helping. Okay, which is just so ironic, but yet it makes so much sense to us in the moment. And the thing is, you're probably going to be helping that person later on, and that usually kind of runs through me when I have an argument, and that just makes me either quit the argument or just do the seek first understand method that we'll jump to. You want to just talk about that?
And just another note on that is like I really believe like if you choose to be proactive, that you can avoid arguments with people.
Right.
You know, you can. Sometimes people like argue that. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people argue that like there's no way to kind of get around an argument.
Yeah, no,
like,
the argument is important because it allows you to like put your boundaries out and do that.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to it. Like you can't just avoid argumentation with people. Like they're avoiding argumentation's personalities, where people start getting stressed whenever an argument occurs, and then they don't really fix the problem that's at hand. But when you're arguing with someone over something that's a problem, the best way to express your opinions is not through argument yelling back, because what occurs when that happens is that the other person is just thinking of a counter argument.
Right.
But it's sort of to employ this strategy of like understanding their perspective.
Right.
And really understanding why they believe what they do, and then expressing
Yeah,
yours.
which is totally like the seek first understand method. So basically what it's saying is you seek first to understand. That means you give them the talking stick, or you give them the floor to say anything.
Yeah, so when he says talking stick, this is actually something that Stephen Covey took from Indian tribes.
Oh, okay.
They would have this stick, and when all of the tribe leaders met, they would give the stick to each person and like pass it around. And the idea was that the person was allowed to talk until they felt that everyone could communicate back the exact ideas that they were trying to express to them.
And no one else, if you don't have the stick, you can't talk, no matter what.
Yeah.
So
unless spoken to, of course.
Right.
But yeah, you would hold the stick until you felt like everything that you were trying to say was understood by everyone in the group.
Right.
And although it seems kind of juvenile, like this is actually an extremely effective strategy. And Covey found that when you did this with CEOs and stuff, or company management, that it actually really changed the environment of a business.
And coincidentally, this follows exactly with psychologists. The stereotypical impression of psychologists is that they just sit there and listen, which is what we're talking about.
So that would actually be a great podcast, because I kind of would like to talk about like why a psychologist is able to help someone,
right,
and what's actually happening.
Right. But the point is that what you first do is you give them the floor, even at least 10 minutes. You just let them talk. Now you're allowed to say things back, obviously, but you want to just either repeat an idea that they have said, or at least just be like, okay. You want to show them that you're listening, and you're not just just blank stare listening. I mean, that's not going to really do anything. But Covey gives an example about like a son and a dad and he gives like a dialogue about how the dad is trying to communicate with the son. I can't remember the dialogue exactly, but it's something like, hey, I want you to, or like, son, how was school today? Oh, it was good, Dad. So did you take that reading exam? Yeah, but I don't know. Oh, well, do you want to talk about it? Yeah. I mean, actually, I don't think I did very well. You can't tell me you did very well, son. My mom and dad have spent thousands of dollars on your education. I mean, when I was your age, I was working day and night just to read and just to work and get the farm like complete and everything. It was ridiculous. And you're telling me that you're not doing well on your reading exam? And then the son will be like, I guess not. But I think, Joe, like, over here, like, he wants to be a mechanic someday. And I think that's actually not that bad. Like, I wouldn't have to be that smart to do that. And I'd still make some good money. And then the dad... Yeah, well, no, but
I understand. Yeah.
And the dad just immediately says, you cannot be a mechanic. Da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
So the whole point is that the dad is not letting the son speak at all. He's just interjecting with his wisdom to tell the son, no, that's just not the right way.
He's trying to take his ideas and push them on to his son.
Right.
And that comes back to another Covey topic, but continues.
Right. So let me kind of give you a sample dialogue without this, with a seek first understand. So the son would be like, hey, Dad, how's it going? Dad goes, hey, how's school? Son goes, good. Dad, I took that reading test, didn't go very well. Oh, really? What happened? And see, instead of being like, what? You can't tell me you didn't go very well. He goes, oh, really? Like, what happened? And the son goes like, well, I don't know. I just didn't score very well. I was kind of nervous during the test. And Dad goes, I get nervous sometimes too when I take tests. Why don't you tell me a little bit more? Like, and then basically each time he's saying this, he's allowing the son to really develop the idea while he's talking. And the thing is that a lot of the ideas that you think about, when you actually verbally say them, they actually make much more sense to you. You are able to connect the dots a lot easier. And that's what seek first understand actually does. Not only do you understand the other person,
but the other person just understand their perspective.
Exactly. You're letting the other person understand what is going on. And that's why listening is so important. So that's what I got out of it. And the other part is then to be understood, which means you want the other person to understand what you are thinking.
Yeah, and they won't understand what you're thinking until they feel like they've been understood.
Right.
Oftentimes we think it's the opposite, that we need the other person to understand us first.
Yeah.
But because everyone thinks that, nobody actually takes the time to understand the perspective of another person.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely want to say, my brother and I, though, we both read this book, and it's kind of weird, though, because when we get in an argument, we're both trying to seek first to understand. So we're just both like, oh, really? Tell me more about that. And then he's like, no, you go first. You tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
So.
But you probably don't argue much, do you?
No, not really, but I don't know. So the whole point is that you want them, if you give them the open floor, odds are 90% of the time they will solve their own problem.
Yeah, and that falls into a very psychological principle too, is that people often solve their own problems. They don't get advice from others. Most of the time when we give advice, people don't take it. So the analogy that that Covey uses is a guy goes to an eye doctor and is diagnosed with an eye correction problem, and the doctor says, hey, here are my glasses, I've been wearing these for 15 years, you can take them and hopefully they make your eyesight better. But of course they don't, because it's not the same prescription. It's not the prescription for that problem. And that's often the way advice is that we give advice to people that isn't actually helpful to the specific specifications of that person's problem. Maybe it is, but until we actually listen to what their problem is, they don't really appreciate our advice. I find that teachers have a big problem with lecturing students before understanding the situation that they actually live in.
Right.
So I did want to kind of go back to sort of this idea that you had, seek first, understand before being understood, and kind of relate it to parenting.
Okay.
I'm not a parent, so but I've been a child, and this is something that my parents have done that I've always really appreciated, and it's always made me feel like accepted and stuff. But Covey has this example in the book where he talks about his son and how his son would go out and he was played baseball and stuff. But his son wasn't very coordinated and stuff.
Okay.
And so whenever his son went up to bat, he'd strike out. And so Covey felt like the right thing to do was to encourage his son, like, hey, it's all right, we all strike out sometimes, and they cheer on their son and give him extra attention, hoping that it would eventually lead to him becoming a better player and stuff.
Yeah.
But Covey and his wife sat down and really thought about it, and they said, why is it that we're doing this? Why is it that we're encouraging our son? Is it because we're afraid of what other parents will think about our son, and we want to look like good parents in front of them?
Oh.
Is the motive actually selfish, or are we really doing the thing that's most beneficial to our son?
To our son, yeah.
And the thing is that they realized that what they're doing, like cheering on their son, was really just something that they were doing to feel socially accepted by the other parents.
Gotcha.
Not because they truly accepted their son and where he was at. So they decided that they were going to change things up, and they were going to stop doing stuff like this. And they were just going to give signals and let their kid know that they really accept them, but not feel the need to socially stand up for them by cheering them on and encouraging them. Let them develop these skill sets themselves. Well, it turned out that their kid eventually went on to become an all-state football player. So he suddenly got a lot better.
I don't remember that story from the book.
Yeah, but what it illustrates is that oftentimes when we're interacting with other people, we do stuff for ourselves, our own social benefit. And parents do this a lot. They don't want their kids to be seen in a certain light. And is that because they don't want to be seen as certain parents, or because they really care about their child?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times it's because they don't want to be seen in a certain light. That's why they push their kids to do stuff that their kids don't want to do. It's all about them, not about their kid. Mm-hmm. And when you actually look at what is best for your kid, a lot of times self-acceptance, letting them do what they enjoy, and letting them grow in their own ways is really important. So that sort of ties into seek first, understand before being understood.
Right.
But it's also, I think, it's something that when I'm a parent, that I think is really important to helping my kid develop.
Just because of time, I want to make sure we're able to cover other books.
Yeah,
so
fine.
Is it right? I'll move on to maybe a few books that I liked, and then maybe we can bounce back and forth or something like that. Okay. So the other books that I really love, I love these books so much, are by Dale Carnegie, and the two books are How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, and How to Win Friends and Influence People. And these books are more of techniques, I would say, but they're very good. You can just kind of peek open and read different chapters at whatever sparks your interest. But the ones from How to Stop Worrying and Start Living that I just wanted to cover very briefly was, I think it's chapter number 6, How to Crowd Out Worry from Your Mind. I think I'm saying that right. But basically, this book, what this chapter says is, it says there's a very simple psychological principle, and it's you can only think of one thing at one moment. So if you try to think about what your plans are for tomorrow and how an atom works, you just can't.
Yeah.
If you close your eyes and try to think about it, you can't think of them at the same time, but you can alternate back and forth very quickly. Mm-hmm. And the point is that worry is a thought. In order for you to worry about something, you have to think of it. You have to be like, oh my God, that exam is tomorrow. I have to consciously worry about it. But if I were to do something at the same time, I physically am unable to worry about it. So let's say I'm trying to solve a math problem, okay? While I'm solving x squared equals, 455, in my head, which would be amazing if I could do that, I simply cannot worry because all my concentration is on this problem. And the whole point is that in order to stop worrying, just get busy. You are too busy to worry. That's the thing. And so that principle has carried on for me for a long time. Anytime I'm worried, I just get up and I start cleaning my apartment. I'm just I don't care what the situation is. I'm just gonna go clean. That's my reflex, and it gets my mind off of it. I have probably some amazing podcasts playing at the same time. And the point is that there's so many things going on that I physically cannot worry. And that's made a really big impression on my life. Another chapter that I just want to talk about very briefly was the insomnia chapter. Now we talked about this in Sleep and Recovery, but the main point is worry usually leads to insomnia, and the whole point of this chapter was the worry about not having a good night's rest is worse than not having a good night's rest. And that blew my mind, because when I lay down now, I just think to myself, you know what? The worry is worse, so I'm not going to worry, and that's it. I'm just going to go to bed. I don't care. And I sleep really well. Another chapter, finally, I want to talk about was the stop loss chapter, which means you just put a stop loss on your worry. You just say, I'm not going to worry about this anymore, and I don't care what happens. I'm just not going to worry about it anymore. And honestly, like, I didn't think that chapter was legit. Like, I was like, you can't do that. You're going to keep worrying about it. Like, if I lost money in the stock market, I'd still worry about it. But I guess after years of trying this, it actually works. Like, you can literally just be like, I don't care what happens. I literally don't care. And I'm just going to do something else now. And I'm going to live in the moment. I'm not going to worry about it. And 9 times out of 10, the situation resolves.
Yeah.
You
know, on top of that, like, one thing I found about worry is that when we observe our thoughts and we observe this worry, it seems kind of silly that, like, these little words in their head trigger these emotional feelings inside of our body, and then we allow this to happen. So one thing I do is, like, when I get, like, really stressed or nervous for something, I just sit there and, like, observe it. Like, I just sit and, like, my mind kind of spins over and over, going back to these ideas, like, circulating through these stressful situations and stuff. And I'm just like, you know, all that these thoughts do is produce this feeling inside my body that I don't like.
Yeah.
That's it. I think, why don't I just be okay with this feeling of discomfort? And then you sort of can overcome the feelings that you feel from that situation.
One other thing that I really learned from this, I think is so good, is 50% of the worry that you have is because you don't even know what you're worried about. So, in other words, let's say you're just worried, like, you're like, I don't know, like, she might break up with me or something, or I don't know, did I do something bad to her? Like, I don't know, maybe our relationship's not going well. Like, what he suggests is just take, like, a notepad, or it doesn't matter. I use, like, a Word document normally, and you just write out 3 questions. You think, what am I worried about? Why am I worried about it? And what am I going to do to solve that problem? And you just fill out those 3 lines. And what they did is they actually did this for people in, like, business solutions. Like, when a person was going to approach the boss, they had to fill out a form before they approached the boss. And the form was just like, what is the problem? Why is it a problem? What are your proposed solutions to solve it? And that cut down 90% of the visits to the boss, because they solved it on their own. So the whole point is that this eliminates half your worry if you're just able to write down in words what you're actually worried about. That blew my mind.
That demonstrates something we've discussed before about, like, the logical and emotional mind, is that oftentimes we have these emotional problems, and we are trying to logically understand them, but because our thoughts are so, like, sporadic and all over the place, we can't do that. And so, like, the act of verbalizing or writing actually helps us to, you know, organize these thoughts and determine what it actually is that's causing these problems.
Right. Yeah. And we could do a podcast on worry. There's much more I would want to go into.
That's.
Did you want to talk about one of your books then?
Sure. Well, one book that I really recommend for someone who wants to understand human interaction and stuff is David Hume's Treaties of Human Nature. Hume's the one disclaimer about Hume is that Hume's a pretty challenging read because he writes in older English style, but Hume is just a brilliant man. And in this, he goes over pretty much every single emotion that people feel, like, and different things in which people do, and just describes them in detail, why they exist. You know, why beliefs, why ideas come into our head. There's sort of this debate between rationalism and empiricism, which is, you know, like, whether we learn through experience or whether we learn through thinking and stuff like that. But it's a very comprehensive guide to almost every single human emotion that we feel, and, like, more stuff behind it. And it's awesome. Like, I really recommend that for someone who's, you know, wanting to understand human nature.
Gotcha.
But that
was like a specific example maybe, or a chapter you could pull out of that, or just kind of hard to. It's like, kind of like a read it as a whole type of thing.
Yeah, you have to read it as a whole. I can't necessarily think of it.
Yeah, well,
I've kind of discussed, like, ideas from that book, like, all the time.
Gotcha.
But for me to pinpoint one, it's been a little while since I've read it. But why don't we hear your?
Yeah. So another book I wanted to jump into is How to Influence and Influence People, and these are, like, more like tips. But if you use a lot of these, they kind of accumulate to have a powerful effect. So the most basic one is the easiest. It's just smile. Just show your white parrots. And the reason why this is so effective, we said earlier on another podcast, was because when you smile, you change your epigenetics, which are basically the programs that run protein production in your brain, so that you are actually happier. And when you smile, you communicate to the other person that you are happy, which is what people like to see. Like, people like to be around people.
We talk about giving value to other people, and one of the best ways we do that is through time and positive emotion.
Right.
People like feeling good. They like the good feeling that they get from an interaction.
Yeah, right. Like, when you hear, like, someone describe a nice person, what do they usually say? They say, oh, well, they're really nice, they're really kind, they're always smiling all the time, or, you know, they're happy a lot. They're just a nice person to be around. You know, the whole point is that just a basic smile is so simple but yet so effective. So that was one thing. Talking about what the other person is interested in. And this is so important, but I can guarantee you in, like, 90% of your conversations, you are trying to talk about what you are interested in.
Yeah.
I know for a fact I always do this. Even right now, talking about the book that I want to talk about is what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in your stuff. Yeah. So the whole point is that people are interested in being heard, and they're interested about the topics. This is a common problem with like Asperger patients, is that they only talk about what they want to talk about, and even if the social cues from other people say I'm not interested in this, they just keep talking about it. So what ends up happening is, I always try to flip the tables by getting interested in somebody else's topic.
Yeah.
Whether it's on like penguins in the Arctic, or if they're talking about some science concept over my head, I always try to learn and try to at least reach some sort of understanding with them, because honestly, I'm not here to just talk about myself all day long. I really want to hear what you're interested in, so that we can both kind of grow together. In that topic.
Can I add some quick stuff on
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
So I read How to Win Friends and Influence People like freshman year of high school or something, and I remember after reading it, this section really stuck out to me, and I was like, I'm going to implement this. So I started just asking a lot of questions to people about themselves and things like that, and I think that I went like beyond the point of weird. I think I just like one thing I learned, which I think is a great piece of advice, is that there's rules when we're trying to understand a person. There's things that are also important to understand. Firstly, it's okay to sometimes talk about what we're interested in, because like I said, people enjoy emotions that come from conversation. So if you're talking incredibly passionate about something, that passion could be spread to the other person. They could feel good. Or if it's like a funny story or something and a shared laughter, the shared emotion can be positive. So it's not to say that it's not okay for you to sometimes talk. But the other thing is that when people hear this advice of trying to understand the other person, like I said, I had the problem just asking question upon question. You have to also understand that people don't like being interviewed. They don't like feeling interviewed, because it seems very manipulative. It seems like you're just asking all these questions because you want them to like you, which, okay, it's not bad if you don't want them to like you, but you are putting too much burden of conversation on this other person, and people just feel uncomfortable being interviewed. People don't go out to hang out to be interviewed by other people. Now, it's not to say that you can't ask personal. Questions are good, but there has to be a balance. And one thing I've heard is that normal conversations that flow, like when you study a conversation where both people vibe back and forth, there's two things that go on. First off, there's a question asked normally, then there's a statement by the other person, then the person who asked the question makes a statement.
Right.
And it goes off of that. So most conversations do not flow from question to question to question. Question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. That's how an interview flows. But most conversations go question, answer, comment, question, answer, comment. And it's important that you input your own stuff into the conversation about it at the same time. So you shouldn't take this advice as like just bombard people with questions. You should still make statements of your own and not put too much burden on the person that you're discussing with. But I think it's a great piece of advice.
One thing I do, like, two things. I shoot for like 70% of the time they're going to be talking 30%. I'm going to be talking, and it ends up being 50-50 usually. The other thing is when instead of asking a question, I make a comment with like
a statement that asks a question.
A statement that asks them to fill in the let's say, let's say we're talking about like finance business. I don't know anything about it, so I might be like, hey Paul, like, so what's your major again? Sorry. And then
entrepreneurship.
Okay. You know, I had a friend in that, but I never understood it completely. And that is not, it's not a question, but it kind of is. And then he talks about it, and then I kind of give a little bit of feedback, and then he talks more about it. So the whole point is that if you are able to do that, you are able to make sure that the conversation is held in their court. It's in their interest.
That's the most important thing, is that we hold the conversation in their court, but that we don't neglect putting our own statements and own opinions into it. Otherwise, we just feel like we're pushing an interview on them, which most people don't like.
People, when an interview happens, the other person who's interviewing is really not supposed to give an opinion. They're just supposed to be like, question, question, question. If you're able to like throw in an opinion that has a hook on it, it allows the other person either to correct your opinion or to favor it or to like give you a better understanding of that topic. So it's not exactly a very clear-cut method.
But when we look at it logically, so if you think about it, like when you're asking question upon question, I think it comes across as needy sometimes. Like, I need a response. I need you to validate my question by saying something. But when we make statements, we sort of insert the fact that we believe we have value on the opinion, and we have something that was worth saying and stuff. And not just question upon question.
A common trap that I get into actually is I never try to disagree with a person, and what ends up happening to me is I get caught in a situation where they might be talking about something that I'm like I'm really not in favor for. I don't know, like maybe like kickboxing or something. I don't know. There's something like
every kid should learn kickboxing.
Every kid should learn kickboxing. You know, they need to learn how to defend themselves on the street or something. And I may be like, well, no, it can cause injuries while they're training. So the thing is that a common trap that I fall into a lot is I don't give a negative opinion on it, and so eventually it leads to a point where they're like, hey, do you want to go to a kickboxing? Like, we can go to a kickboxing match, or hey, we can learn kickboxing. And then all of a sudden I have to be like, I got plans, you know, like
then it feels like you have to be deceiving in order to get out of it, because you've expressed all this interest.
Exactly.
And that's why I think comes back to like the Covey idea of tactics versus character, and how it's important that on top of these tactics that we're doing, like seeking first understand, that we actually have like good intentions and integrity behind them. Like integrity is a huge part, like just being honest. Like a lot of philosophers talk about friendships, and they say a friendship should just be about like a friendship where both parties are not honest to each other is not a friendship. If you need to be straightforward, like if someone's talking about kickboxing, how it's good for school, you can say that I'm kind of against it, and you can express your opinions against it. But I think what the person appreciates is that you took the time to understand. They're okay with the fact that you don't agree with them.
Yeah.
They respect you for not agreeing with them.
Right.
But but it can also be done poorly.
Yeah.
It can turn into an argument where both parties dislike each other. So
Exactly, yeah.
I think it's an emotional intelligence situation where it's like you have to express what you feel, because otherwise it's going to come across as really incongruent with everything that you do is going to be incongruent. Someone with Asperger's is hard to do it in this sense, but it's important that you're honest. I actually think that you're very good at being honest, so throw that in.
But anyway, so was there any other books that you wanted to cover real quick, just because I think we're running out of time?
So another book that I just want to mention real quick, maybe we'll just go over these real fast, but a book that has always had a lot of value to me was Psycho-Cybernetics. It's basically it's a book written by a plastic surgeon who performs surgeries on different people, plastic surgery on different people, and he talks about like how he notices these psychological changes that come from these small surgeries, and how sometimes like sort of the process someone goes through on like whether they want the surgery to be done and stuff. But he talks about how most of like confidence and the way we feel about ourselves is an internal thing and not based on the external. It's so like. But these little surgeries that really don't make much difference can totally change someone's confidence level and things like that.
Yeah, I actually there was a study, like I always read the science Reddit, that's like my news, and they just did a study on how like facial plastic surgery actually doesn't change your level of attractiveness, which blew my mind. I didn't agree with it. Yeah. So, but anyways, sorry to interrupt. But keep
that's
going,
awesome. Yeah. No, but it was just talking about how like when people get plastic surgery, they start giving themselves permission to feel confident. And it's a very good book talking about sort of the mental aspects to confidence and how we feel about ourselves, and sort of how different people think differently and therefore live different lives, even though external situations may be the same.
Yeah, actually, honestly, one thing I say is I'm always like very uncomfortable with like my looks, and so what ends up happening is I end up not looking the other person in the eye as much because I don't want to realize that they're seeing me. Does that make sense? And so and it happens all the time, especially with people who are like who pay attention to looks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they have their hair done or something, or everything's like very neat. Their clothes are like pristine and stuff like that. I get really uncomfortable because I'm like, oh my gosh, they're probably looking at me like I'm a disaster, So
it's something that you have to work on then,
right?
Because you shouldn't feel that way, like.
Yeah. It's just hard. Or I'll try to like stay away from them so they don't notice facial details as much. Like there's all these little subtle things that I do, and I realize it's easier to do. It's easier to say than do,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's much easier to say. Yeah, I don't want to say like this is something easy. It's like what I was saying before, like being proactive and changing our thoughts is often very challenging, and it might be common sense, but to actually do it is incredibly hard.
Right.
And most changes that are worthwhile take time and are challenging.
Yeah.
It kind of comes back to the thing that like you have to plant your plants in the spring to get a harvest in the fall. Like these things take a long time and they take hard work to work through and stuff.
Yeah. Another book I just want to jump to really quick is I believe it's called Body Language. Body Language. And it is really good. It gives you a lot of tips, I would say, just to improve your overall like the way you conduct yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we know a couple common sense things, like don't cross your arms, don't cross your legs, don't put your arms behind, like don't do the you grab one arm, let it hang, and then the other arm is like kind of like grabbing it from the front across your chest, because it makes you appear like you're just very uncomfortable in the situation. There's all these little tips that they give.
We can actually increase our comfort in the situation by changing our body language too. Because your body language affects your internal state, and your internal state affects your body language. So by forcing certain things, maybe it might look weird sometimes, but a lot of times we can like put ourselves into a more comfortable state.
But also, another thing it distinguishes between was like the smile and the fake smile. So a fake smile usually means that there's not going to be as many creases around their eyes, and they're just going to be using just their mouth, and that's it. But like a real smile like uses like their the creases around the eyes. So I thought that was really useful. But I think the other thing useful for me at least was the handshake. And they talk about the angle that your hand shakes at and how that either conveys dominance or submission. So if your hand,
I'm guessing before you even say it, I'm guessing that like just thinking about it, like if you come from under, like if you go low, it would be like submissive. But if you like come like from equal grounds, or
exactly,
like higher up,
exactly, you nailed it. So if your palm is facing up, like an open palm is facing up, the more it's facing up, the more submissive you are, and then the more obviously the other way when your palm is facing down, the more dominant you are. A lot of times what I do is I go for like a little bit halfway but slightly submissive. Because I want to give the other person an impression of that I'm not trying to overpower them. So that has helped me. I mean, I can't give you like solid evidence that that's helped me, but I think actually my handshake has become more I have more confidence in my handshake because I know all this.
Yeah, that's the thing is I want to do a podcast, maybe that's podcast on confidence and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think confidence comes from knowing that what we're doing is better than what we would have done otherwise. Yeah.
I think that's pretty much all the time. Did you have any other books that you wanted to comment on really quick?
Well, one book that I recommend if you have a problem procrastinating, not getting stuff done, Get Things Done is the name of the book.
Okay.
It's a really good book on that topic. I've done a podcast on procrastination, and maybe we'll put that in the header or something. But it talks all about this book.
Okay.
So check that out. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, leave any questions, comments below, and stay tuned for our next podcast. Thanks.
Adios.